Good morning, everyone. And what we're going to do in this series of videos, I'm going to show you how to use SQLite in your application. Uh, the way we're going to approach this, I'm going to give you an empty app with all the UI elements in it, and then we'll just introduce to it the basic functions of SQLite. All right. And typically what happens is that when you want to use SQLite in your application, you design your interface, so that's given. Then we create the class model, create a model class that represent the data that we're going to insert into the database. We also have something called, we create a database helper class, and this is an SQLite is basically the main class that manages the interaction with your database. And we're going to look into more details of this. And the last part that you do after you do this step is you actually start doing the CRUD operations against your database, which is what? Creating tables, creating records, adding inserting records, updating records, deleting records, and things and so forth. So those are the steps that we're going to follow in this series of tutorials. So now in the channel that you will have a link to a project, and then you can download it and follow the steps that we're going to do in this class. So I have already the project created, the UI elements in it, and the application is about storing. It's called, like, we have a club, and we want to store the information about the club members in my database. So it's a simple app for now. All I have UI elements, the ID, and this is going to be on auto increment. I have the name, I have the age, and I have the city. And now when we click on an insert, we will take this information. We're not going to do validation. You can do validation on your own. You do, if things are valid, we insert this information in the database. For the find, we should be able to type in a particular ID here or a particular name, and then say find, and then it should display the information for that member in the database. Now, obviously, there are other views that you can do here. You can do, for example, list view, so where you can see all the members. But hopefully, we will do that in the other videos after we get the basics of SQLite in Android. All right. So let's go ahead and get started. So if we go back to the PowerPoint, what we talked about, the next thing we need to do is that you create the class model. We've done the user interface. Let's create the class model. Before I do the class model, let's examine the main activity class, and we'll see what we have in here. In the main activity class, I've created the access to all the widgets on the screens. Basically, they're all text fields. I named them, and I have two functions. One function is called insert, and I got access to the name, the city, and the age. Now the ID is going to be auto increment, so I don't need to get the ID from the screen. And then I also have a function that is called find. When we click on find, we should be able to execute the proper code to find the information for that particular member. All right. So I've done that in the activity. I linked those two buttons already with those on click, the insert and the find. So you can use this to start, and then we're going to add the next steps. What are the next steps? The next step is to create the class model. What is the class model? A class model help you better design your application or architect your application in order to store all information related to the members that we are creating. So typically, a model class is an entity in Java that contains all the information that I'm going to store into the database. All right. And this class model is nothing but a Java class with setter, getters, and maybe a toString method, and maybe also the constructors. So how we do that? So in our application, we have the ID, we have the name, then we have the age, and we have the city. So we need to create a class that represent this data that we want to store in the database. So we're going to go to the Java. We're going to go to our application, to our package. We're going to say new. I want to make sure that I'm recording. I want to make sure the sound is on because I've done that before. Okay. And then we're going to say new. Come on here. And then we're going to say Java class. Now, the Java class that we want to create is called member. And why? Because we are storing information about club members. So I'm going to click on yes. I'm going to make that bigger. And now I need to define the properties. What are the properties that I have? The properties that I have private, int, and then ID. Private, string, and name. Private, string, and city. And then finally, private, int, and age. So those are my attributes. How do I decide on these attributes? You decide on this attribute based on your need, based on what you want to store in your database, all right? So now I've done the basic attributes of this entity class. What do we do next? What do we do next is actually to create the setter and getters and then the constructors for this class. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to do this part first. Okay, you can use, there's a tool in your Java code, in Android Studio to generate these things for us. So I can just click here and then I click on generate, and then I can generate the constructors first. And for the constructors, I am going to construct all of the, I want a constructor with the parameters, with all the attributes. So if I hit OK, now it generated the constructors for me. This is what is known as a non-default constructor, and I will receive all the attributes here and set them in this constructor. I can select create just for sake of completeness. You can do one generate and another constructor, but this time an empty constructor, just in case people wants to create members with empty attributes. All right. The next thing I need to do, is to create the constructor, the setters and getters. So I'm going to do create, generate. Again, one of the options here is setter, getters, setters, or getters and setters. I want to be able to set and get all the attributes, right? Maybe not set the ID, but it's okay. We can leave it that way because even though when we're creating the model, we need the setter for the ID. So I'm going to say getters and setters, and I'm going to select all the attributes. Now I've created all the setter and getters for that, or the attributes in this class. And the last thing I want in here is a method that allow me to print the details of that of this object. And usually we have a method called toString. So I'm going to say refactor again, generate, and one of the options here says toString method. So, and then you say, what do you want to print? What do you want to return in this toString method? I'm going to return all the information related to that class. So I'm going to say I will return, it's a toString method. It will return a string and it will give me the member information in a format of kind of like dictionary, ID, name, city, and it will put the values here. All right, so we've done that first part. We've created the model. So the next thing we need to do is that we need to test this model, and where do we create this model? All right, so what I'm going to do in our main activity, we have a function, we have a method called insert, right? And this insert method typically what happens when you're doing a transaction against the database, there are steps that we follow. And these are the steps that usually happens when you're interacting with a database or any transactions for that matter. You get your inputs, and those inputs is going to come from the user interface, the UI. So I'm getting the name, the city, and the age. I'm not getting the ID because the ID again is going to be an auto-generate from the database. And then the next step we will do, we will validate our input to make sure that our input are valid. And if they are valid, what do we do next? We create the model, which is called member, and then we perform database operation. Now, to perform the database operation, one of the options in the PowerPoint is that we need to create this database helper. So in this model, we will use the database helper class and pass to it the object that we've created. So all the insert or interaction to the database happens in that model, that helper class, all right? So before we get to this point, let's test this part first. Let's create the object. So I'm gonna say member.m equal, and then we say new member. And what do we pass to it? What we pass to it, there are different attributes. One of the attributes are what? For example, the first thing, you need to make sure you follow the constructor. What is the constructor says? The first attribute, let's make sure what do we have. And usually it should tell you here. So the first attribute, I'm gonna pass 0 for now, okay? And then second attribute for the ID, and the name is going to come from this screen, which is called name here. And the next one is gonna come from this screen, which is called here city. And then the last one is gonna come from the screen again, and it's going to be called age. All right, so now I've created my object. Now, if you wanna print the object, make sure it works, you can do that. You can say log.d, and you display member info, and then you just put the information for that member, which is what? M2 string. So that will print the information from that member. All right, log is spelled wrong, so it's going to be log.d. All right, so that's the first part. We've created the model, we've created the object from the screen, and now we can test it to make sure that we are actually creating the model. So I'm going to run it and then see if that works. All right, let's pause this for a minute while we are waiting for this to run. Okay, so the application is running. Now the ID doesn't matter right now. Again, we're gonna use auto increment, but the name is going to be my name, 33, city, charge. Then we click on insert. What should happen now, it would have created, it went here into this function, and it would have created the object, and it would have printed this member information in the, either in the log or the debug menu window. So let's check the run, and here it is, it's printed in the run. This is my member information, and I typed in info wrong, so we'll do that. So at least that part worked. So we created the project, the object, we created the model, we've created in the insert function, we created the object, and then we printed it. All right, I'm gonna stop this video, and then I'm gonna go to the next video, and the next video will talk about creating the DB helper class. All right, so I'll see you in a minute.